I will remind you that our chicken stew's on November the 9th. Jason's done got the fire built, done got the butter in the pot and all that kind of stuff. So. Yes. If the weather's anything like it was yesterday, this morning, it'd be real nice.
Where did you say in the Bible?
James chapter 2.
Where's James
Got it. You're gonna get it.
Can't understand those towels.
That's all right. They learn to confuse you. I'll spend this morning probably more time introducing this lesson than I actually will talking about the lesson itself. I don't know how many of you have even been through Portland and read it this week. I know a lot of weeks I'm guilty of not picking my Portland up and seeing what's in store for the coming week. I ain't gonna lie about it. Anyway, it's a simple thought for today's lesson, but I feel like it's needed. It's definitely needed for me, so if it's needed for me, I'm sure it's needed for somebody else in this class. Today's lesson is going to talk about partiality. Or you could put it another way and list it as favoritism. Maybe you're sitting here this morning and say, oh, I don't show favoritism to anybody, or I don't show partiality. Hang on to that thought just for a minute, or for a few minutes, while we talk about this. Okay. Show of hands. How many of you in here are parents? Let me finish my question. Are parents and have 2 or more children? Raise your hand. Very good. Well, and you'll understand why I said 2 or more. You know, Bill Cosby always said if you didn't have 1 kid, you wouldn't consider a parent because you didn't have to go through, well, will you stop touching me? And I can understand where he's coming from. But anyway, but as parents having more than 1 child, how many times have we as parents ever been accused by one of the other children of showing favoritism to the other? I'm hearing lots of everydays back there. And it could be for various reasons. You know, I look back and I remember when I was younger, I won't say smaller, when I was younger, Daddy used to every once in a while, he'd drag out these old slide reels. Had pictures on it of different things. Well, there was always all these pictures of Jamie on there. But there wasn't that many of me. There'd be a few, but you know, I got thinking myself, well, how come I ain't more pictures? Do what, Jason? It's 2. Anyway. But my point being, at that point, had I realized most everything had switched to, you know, like a 35mm camera, and there was plenty of pictures of me. They just wasn't on slide reels. So, but even looking at my 2 children, I realized that there was things that we did when Brianna was born, because she was the firstborn, that maybe we didn't do with Alex. And I'm not saying we were showing favoritism. Maybe it could be construed that way, but maybe our children or others see that sometimes, whether it be pictures, whether it be toys. Well, how come you got him one of those and you didn't get me? You know, why didn't I get $5 to get what I wanted? During arguments, well, you always take Alex's side, or you always take, you know, Megan's side, or you always take Casey's side, or whatever it may be. Discipline. Well, if it'd been me, it'd whoop me. So, I mean, other children. Well, you know, I wish you treated me like you treated, you know, Macy, or I wish you treated me like you did, you know, Bruce's kids. I think we, as parents, we've all heard. Well, if you hadn't, trust me, you will. This and there could be many more things that we can talk about. Like I said, sometimes we're partial and we don't even realize it. Before we get into reading the lesson, let's kind of talk out loud here. As far as the world is concerned, what are some things that you can think of, and I'll take them out loud, that can play a part in people playing favorites or showing partiality? Is this thing on? Can y'all hear me in the back? Okay, I'll start. Race, skin color. Appearance. Way people's dressed.
Economic status.
Very good. Somebody else.
Social status.
Yep. Economic status, social status.
Class, again, or is that the same thing as social?
Yeah, that'd go along the same lines, which could include job status. You know, where somebody works versus where somebody else works.
Religion.
Oh,
Beliefs.
that's one I didn't even think about and should have. Thank you, Prince.
He's a princess, didn't he?
Princess.
Anybody else? I mean, political affiliation.
Oh, we can't put that in there.
Well, I'm just telling you. All of those, and I'm sure there's many other things that can play a part in showing favoritism or partiality towards somebody. And
Education.
Yeah.
education's very good.
Comfort.
Come again?
Comfort.
Comfort.
You're
Comfort
you're
zone.
doing something already, and you're comfortable with that person or with a group of people.
Yep. Somewhere between there and here, I've lost my pin. No, I gotta make a note here or I'll forget it. Something I want to bring out in a minute.
You know, in church, you've got to be really careful. And we all continually have to be conscious of the fact that you're just more comfortable around people you're familiar with, and we need to treat the visitors and walking through people we've never seen the same way we treat each other all the time.
Absolutely. We'll get into some of that here in just a brief minute. All right, anybody else before I go on? That's all good. All good things. And like I say, I'm sure we could probably think of. But the point our lesson's trying to make is that Jesus did not and does not show partiality to anyone. You know, there's multiple times, and I'll touch on that more in a minute, but there's multiple times throughout his word that he talks about not showing partiality. You know, in Luke 6:47, he says, "Whosoever cometh to me." He didn't put any kind of prerequisites in there that you had to have, hair on your head or no hair on your head, or facial hair or no facial hair, anything like that. There's no kind. My point is, there's no kind of stipulation that he sets forth for somebody to come to him. It don't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you've done. Whosoever means whosoever. That's anybody. Anybody in here. Anybody in this world. In John 3:16, he says, "Whosoever believeth." It doesn't say the rich man. It doesn't say the poor man. It doesn't say the white man, the black man, the red man, the pink man, or woman. It says whosoever, meaning any. Regardless of any of the things that we just mentioned. And one of the things that I got from the lesson was that if we could go back, all the way back to Calvary's cross, if we looked at the foot of the cross, the ground is level. So, well, what do you mean by that, Andy? Well, I mean that there's no, it's even ground for everyone that wants to come to the cross, that wants to come to Him. There's no high hill for this group of people, or there's no low valley for this other group of people. It's all level. We're all on the same field. So we'll get into our lesson a little bit and talk just for a few minutes about what James is trying to tell the church and tell us here. In the first 4 verses it says, "My brethren, have not the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, with respect of persons. For if there come into your assembly a man with a gold ring in goodly apparel, and there come in also a poor man in vile raiment, and ye have respect to him that weareth the gay clothing, and say unto him, Sit thou here in a good place, and say to the poor, Stand thou there, or sit here under my footstool, are ye not then partial in yourselves, and are become judges of evil thoughts?" James has given us a good example here. Jason touched on it. Jason Couch did just a second ago, talking about visitors coming in. And that's what James is trying to tell us here. When people come into the assembly here, when they come to church, what they've got on or how they appear should have no bearing on how they're treated. If the man comes in that's in a 3-piece suit and we go up and shake his hand, if a man comes in and he's got, I don't care if he's got on a t-shirt, flip-flops, and shorts, we need to go up and shake his hand too and make him feel welcome. We don't need to treat him any different than we did the man in the 3-piece suit. And that's what James is trying to tell us. But he says this man had on goodly apparel, had on a gold ring, and the poor man had on vile raiment. Maybe he had on, may have been the best he had, but his shirt may have been dirty. Maybe it hadn't been ironed. Maybe there was a hole in a pair of his pants. Maybe his skin was dirty looking where he needed a bath. You know, I can imagine all sorts of things here to try to give myself a mental image of what James is trying to portray here. But what he's telling us is it doesn't matter. It don't matter what they've got. Regardless. Don't be better to one than you are to the other. If the front, you know, if you bring in the man that's dressed well and say, "Oh, come up here and sit down on the front pew," then this man comes in and the shape he was in, he deserves that same seat right beside that rich man. And that's what James is trying to tell us. What he's trying to show us here is that Christ gives us all that same opportunity. Christ didn't show any partiality. All through His Word, there's plenty of places where He didn't show partiality. It didn't matter if the people coming to Him were sick or if they were well off. It didn't matter. He took them in. And if we're not careful, we can all, or have been, guilty of doing this. Whether it be that blatant in the way it's portrayed, or whether it be something subtle. We've got to be careful. We've got to keep looking to Him to keep us humble. So let's think about it for just a second outside of the confines of the church. Same rules still apply. He's given an example of how the church should treat visitors and treat people coming in, but we should be the same way in our daily walk of life. Bless you. What James is saying in the first 4 verses still applies. Class, we need to be careful on how we treat. I listed our new neighbor, but it could be an old neighbor. Maybe it's somebody that's lived in your neighborhood for years. But for whatever reason, you know, you think you're better than them, or you just don't go talk to them or whatever, or, you know, maybe the way they've acted in the past is the reason that you've not been to speak to them. Maybe they don't have as nice a home as you do. You know, the devil's let that get in front of you, of going to them and inviting them to church, or going to them and just go up to them and introduce yourself and be friendly to them. That goes a long way. It's somebody that'll just be friendly. We need to be careful on how we treat that coworker of ours Maybe we've been partial to them just because their skin color's not the same as ours. Maybe we go rushing off to talk to Jason and, don't ever go over and speak to Brian. He's telling us here. James is trying to tell us. Treat everybody the same. And we'll talk further about it in a few minutes on the way Jesus sets forth the example, what he tells us. In your quarterly, if you have it, and you don't have to read it right now, but there's a little subsection that says digging deeper. I encourage you to take that and read all those verses. You might not can read them all at one time, but it's different scriptures throughout the Bible. There's probably 8 or 10 of them. And it says, what does God say about favoritism and impartiality? And it's places all throughout the Bible where he talks about how we should act and how we should respond. Moving on to verse number 5. He says, hearken, my beloved brethren, hath not God chosen the poor of this world, rich in faith, and heirs of the kingdom, which he hath promised to them that love him? But ye have despised the poor. Do not rich men oppress you and draw you before the judgment seats? Do not they blaspheme that worthy name by the which ye are called? And I'll paraphrase what James is saying here. He goes on, he says, hey, look, God has chosen the poor. If he's a believer, then he's rich beyond measure. Regardless of what his earthly possessions are, if he believes in me, he's got riches beyond measure. And that's what we ought to be looking at anyhow, instead of earthly possessions and earthly status and all the things that we've talked about. We need to be looking at the heavenly gain side. He goes on, he says, church, you've despised the poor. You've tried to push them to the side and ignore them, and that's what he talks about in the first 4 verses. He talks about the poor man coming in and him saying, oh, you've got to go sit over there, or here you can sit on the floor. Well, there's nothing wrong with sitting in the floor if that's what we're all doing. But if we're having him sit in the floor just because we don't like something about him, then that's what James is telling us here, that we're committing sin. Don't mistake what James is saying here. There's nothing wrong, not a thing wrong with having money. Not a thing in this world until we go to putting that before God. And that's when it becomes a problem. I think about a story I've heard, read, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but I just know how little small children are. And I think we need to live our lives more like these little children do. And you say, well, what in the world are you talking about? Have you ever seen one of your children when they were small around a stranger? I mean, when they're really small, before they had time to get shy and all. When it didn't matter if a stranger walked up to them and spoke to them, they would talk back or whatever, regardless of whether that man or woman was in a suit or a dress or whether they was filthy as rags. It didn't matter. And that's what James is trying to tell us here, or what God's trying to tell us through James, is it don't matter. We need to turn the filter off, if you will, and not filter out anybody. Give everybody the same opportunity. The last part, verses 8 through 13, says, if you fulfill the royal law according to the Scripture, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. You do well. But if you have respect to persons, you commit sin, and are convinced of the law as transgressors. For whosoever shall keep the whole law and yet offend in one point, he is guilty of all. For he that said, do not commit adultery, said also, do not kill. Now if thou commit no adultery, yet if thou kill, thou art become a transgressor of the law. So speak ye, and so do, as they that shall be judged by the law of liberty. For he shall have judgment without mercy, that hath showed no mercy. and mercy rejoiceth against judgment. Verse 8 talks about the royal law, which was the law, what they said was the law of the kings. Well, in Acts chapter 17, early believers proclaimed Jesus as being king. And so Jesus' royal law is what he says right here, that thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And Jesus himself says that over in the book of Luke chapter 10. Mercy here talks about a faithful love or kindness. Kind of summarize what James has told us here this morning. He's just saying that if we fulfill God's command to love thy neighbor as thyself, then we do well. But, as he says here, if we have respect of persons, meaning we show favoritism or we show partiality, then we commit sin. Like I told you when I started, I know I needed this lesson, because I realize there's been times in my life where I've showed partiality. And I'm not saying it won't happen again. I'm just saying that we just need to take what James is telling the church and what Jesus is telling us through James here and try to apply it to our lives. You know, I know people today that are very good about not showing partiality. That it don't matter what your problem is, it doesn't matter what's going on in your life. They'll love you and treat you just as if you were the Queen of England. And I so purpose in my heart to be more like that. That it don't matter what somebody's facing, just be willing to try to help them, try to take them in, try to befriend them, try to be good to them. One of the examples that the commentator listed was, he talked about, I believe it was the governor of Kentucky one year was going to attend some church where his staff called ahead to ask about where they needed to park and that sort of thing. And whoever the church office said, wherever they can find a parking place, it's where you park. You can sit in any empty seat. That's the way it ought to be. Regardless of who walks through these doors, regardless of who we run across on the street, regardless of who we see on the job, or who comes to our front door, I need to treat Jason the same way I treat Ken, the same way I treat Gigi, and vice versa. And y'all are probably as guilty as I am. Sometimes maybe your neighbor or someone does something that frustrates you, and we, in our own mind, tend to run our mouth, maybe not to them, but to ourselves. I wish I wouldn't get here and ride it down the road on this lawnmower on Sunday, or whatever it may be. I wish they wouldn't mush their goldfish bowl out in my driveway, or whatever it may be. It can be the simplest things sometimes that can come between us and being humble. What we have to remember is, if we're professing to be Christians, then there's people we work with, there's other neighbors that are watching to see how we treat that guy that comes up to us that reeks of the world, that hadn't had a bath in 2 or 3 days. And Ralph sat back and said, okay, we'll see how Tim reacts. I'm going to see what he does. I'm going to see if he shuns him, or I'm going to see if he offers to feed him, or to give him a place to take a bath, or whatever. The world is watching. And I think that if we all treated our neighbors like we want to be treated, then this world will be a much better place off, especially in this day of me, me, me. And you've heard me talk about that before. Everybody's out for themselves. But yet I see people that, regardless of what they have or don't have, don't grumble, don't complain. And it makes me say, oh me. It really does. I've seen people that, oh, I'd like to have this. I'd like to have that. Ooh, I want that new skill saw, Jason. Or I want whatever, And yet others others just seem to be happy and content with what they got. And I know I need to strive to be more that way. Word from anybody, that's all. I'll give you what the Lord's given me.